Hello there and welcome to Recon Paint Gaming. I'm Patrick. Today we're going to be talking about timing, ability queues, and when triggers are supposed to happen because we got a lot of requests for it. And also I've seen a lot of questions on the forums and also on Facebook and Reddit as well. So we're going to go over the triggers, especially the definitions and which types of words that you're going to see. We're also going to go over the ability queue, the systems phase, engagement phase, activation phase, when certain triggers are going to happen, and what each definition of those words are. So, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is cover the timing, which we're going to put right here. It is basically a section of the rules reference found on page 22, and it states there are several terms used to indicate the specific timing of an effect. So this basically gives you different definitions to each keyword that you're going to see, because during the game, you're going to look at your cards and see before, at the start of, while, during, and after, and even at the end of. Now, you'll notice during isn't in here, but we're going to cover that because you will see it happen certain times, and then the card later specifies when that triggers. But for this one, we're going to start with before. The effect resolves immediately preceding the timing specified. So the other thing is immediately actually means absolutely nothing in the rules reference. It just signifies that it does happen, of course, immediately, but there's no such thing as something happening immediately because sometimes there are things that can trigger before it, meaning that it can move around slightly, but immediately doesn't mean immediately. It doesn't have any, agency, or it doesn't get to happen before other things because there is certain steps that has to follow. Next is at the start of. This timing is used whilst or with a specified phase or step. So that's going to trigger before anything occurs during that phase or step, like at the start of the activation phase or at the start of the engagement phase, or even at the start of, this ship attacking or something to that effect. Basically, they're going to say when this is going to trigger, and that could actually trigger before other abilities in the queue. Then there's while. And they even space or specified here, while could technically mean anything because this term is often used in combination with multi-step game effects such as an attack, an action, or a maneuver, although less specific than the other timings, like I said. This term is used to narrow down when the ability is resolved during this round. And they even give you a nice example in the context of an attack. If the ability rolls additional attack dice, the ability triggers during the roll attack dice step if the ability modifies defense dice. So it's while attacking, you may modify a focus to a hit result. So even though it does say while and it says while attacking, it doesn't mean it starts at the beginning of the attack step. It actually happens during a specific time while attacking, which is during the modify result step. Next is at the end of. So if something can happen at the start of, something can happen at the end of, such as at the end of your activation, or the end of the turn or round, or end of the systems phase. And this is the timing used to specify a specific phase or step of the ship's activation. This effect triggers after the normal effects of that phase or step have occurred. So it's just basically saying, like, after this happens or at the end of it, this is going to then trigger. And then there's after, which is basically the same thing as while, because while is during and after is not during. So the effects resolves immediately, again, doesn't mean anything, following the timing specified. So after the ship executes a maneuver, or after defense dice have been rolled, and so on and so forth. So it's going to specify each one. Next, we're going to head over to the ability queue because this is when all these timings are going to fit into place. So let's head over to the ability queue. Okay, next up is the ability queue. We're going to put right there. The ability queue is used to resolve the timing of multiple abilities that trigger during the same timing window. Abilities are resolved from the front of the queue to the back of the queue. These abilities are added to the back of the ability queue using the following rules. And now you really need to pay attention to this because this is when things can get a little bit hazy when it comes to when the ability queue comes into play, as well as when certain other triggers or basically variables are going to come into play. But we're going to read the list right here. If both players have abilities that triggered from the same event, the abilities are added to the ability queue in player order. So it doesn't matter the initiative, it strictly is because of the player order. So if both ships, have at the start of the engagement phase, it doesn't matter if one's an I3 and one's an I6, the player one is going to get to go first, and the player one does not get to decide. It has to go first, or they have to go first, and then set off that ability, and then the next ability goes into the queue. Second, if a player has multiple abilities that trigger from the same event, that player chooses the order that those abilities are added to the ability queue. So again, now if I have an I3 and an I6, and they both have the at the start of the engagement phase, then I can choose whether the I6 or the I3 goes, and then it goes over to player 2. Step 3. If resolving an effect from an ability queue triggers additional effects, they are added to the front of the ability queue using the above rules. So basically, for example, at the start of the engagement phase, you may perform a barrel roll, and because that ship has a barrel roll linked into a red focus, it gets to perform that barrel roll, then gets to do the linked focus action, and then you go over to the next ship that has the same ability. Because it gets added to the queue, it gets pushed to the front because it's triggering off of that first ability. Another thing to point out is, and they give a great example here, if a ship performs a red barrel roll and the ship has an ability that triggers after it performs a barrel roll, the ship gains a stress token before the other ability is resolved. So you can't say, I get to perform my barrel roll at the start of the engagement, which is red, but I can then, because I performed a barrel roll, perform this action, but you can't because you were stressed. You then can't link it to another action unless your pilot ability or you have another ability that says you can perform actions while stressed. If an ability's requirements are not met, it cannot be added to the ability queue. For example, at the start of the engagement phase, if a ship has an ability that requires it to be tractored, but that ship is not tractored, that ability cannot be added to the queue. The ship cannot add the ability to the queue even if another ability also added to the queue at the start of the engagement phase. So basically, if you're not triggered then when it's your turn to go and then all of a sudden you become tractored, you can't say, hey, it's still at the start of the engagement phase. You've missed your chance to do it because you were player one, you weren't tractored then, but because my enemy was able to tractor my ship during the engagement phase, I now can add it to the queue. It does not work like that. Once you're in the queue, if you've missed our opportunity, the game keeps going. You cannot jump backwards. If a ship would be removed while there are one or more abilities in the queue, do not remove that ship until there are no abilities in the queue, which that can happen and it can cause different game mechanics. And I can give examples later on, but don't remove a ship until abilities are gone because, for example, like Hope is a great card to where when something is destroyed or removed, that ship gets to perform a focus or boost. So there can be things to where you're going to remove that ship and then you're like, oh, I don't know if it was 0 or 3 away. Shoot, we didn't measure before I took it off the board. And then you're like, all right, well, let's roll it back and maybe see if it was in range for it. So until all abilities are done, don't take ships off the board. Okay, before we get into some examples, we're going to cover the systems phase. And I want to do this for many specific reasons because this is where timing can get confusing. So the systems phase is the second phase of the round. During this phase, the sequence of play starts with a ship with the lowest initiative and continues in ascending order. During this phase, each ship gets an opportunity to choose and resolve any abilities that are explicitly resolved during the systems phase. And that's where I'm bringing up that word during. So during the systems phase, you follow ship's initiative in ascending order from lowest to highest. Without having any specific upgrades, abilities, or tokens, ships that have no effects that can be resolved during this phase. Some abilities that can be used at this time are including dropping bombs, launching bombs, decloaking, deploying, and docking ships. If a player has multiple ships with the same initiative value, that player resolves abilities in any order. So if you have 2 ships during the systems phase, it is their turn. They're both I2s. You can decide which one can drop a bomb or launch a bomb first if you have that option. The player resolves it in any order and then moves on to the next ship of the initiative value, or if the player on the other side has the same initiative value, it then goes to player order. So whoever's first player gets to activate their I2s before my I2s, and so on. All right, so the reason you're here is to look at some crazy examples because I know you guys like tangible things that you can actually see and get your hands on. Because we've gone through a lot of the questions we've seen repeated online, and I would love these examples. So without further ado, let's get into it. Our first example is going to be exactly what we just talked about. It is the start of the systems phase. We have 2 ships that have an ability that can trigger during the systems phase, and that is called intuitive controls. During the systems phase, you may perform a purple barrel roll or boost action. Now, as we said, during actually doesn't have a defined definition. As I stated, it is something that can trigger during the normal steps of the gameplay. So during means when the ship activates, it can perform that barrel roll by spending a force. So in this case, Yoda at initiative 3, we have Obi-Wan at initiative 5. So if for some reason you were like, oh, I'd really like to barrel roll to the right, but Obi-Wan's in the way, let me activate Obi-Wan first because, oh, it doesn't matter. It's player order. I get to decide. I can barrel roll Obi-Wan, then I can barrel roll Yoda, and that is the incorrect step or play. Basically, during the systems phase, you can perform that ability when your initiative triggers. Because he is I3, he activates first before Obi-Wan. Because there is no room to barrel roll, the only option you would have is to boost if you would choose to do so. You, of course, don't have to. And then you can activate Obi-Wan, and he can barrel roll left or right. Okay, this is where a lot of players have difficulty determining when things trigger and when they don't trigger. Because as I just read in the systems phase, things are going to trigger in initiative order as you progress through the systems phase and go to each ship to check if it has a bomb to drop or if it has an ability. However, there is the wordings from timing. So if it says something like at the start of the systems phase or at the end of the systems phase, that doesn't really correlate with the initiative of the ship. It happens outside of the normal timing window, so therefore it then goes to player order. So if let's say I have an I2 and you have an I6, and we both have a ship that says at the start of the systems phase, it doesn't matter what the initiatives are because we haven't progressed through all of those ships from 2 and onward. It's at the start of the systems phase or outside of the normal timing, therefore it only relates to player order. So even though I have an I2 and you have an I6, if I'm player 1, my I2 gets to activate its ability at the start of the systems phase. Okay, here is another great but funny example. It's not going to happen that often, but it's just an example to show you the timing windows and what can happen during different phases and initiative values. So here we have Pops, Contrail. They both have the ability to drop bombs. In this case, they both have a bomb on them, or a mine in this case, which is proximity mines, which is these little doodads right here. So you would think, oh, they both get to drop bombs at the same time. They don't, actually. Again, it goes by an initiative order and then player order if those initiatives line up. In this case, Pops is initiative 4, so he gets to decide whether to drop a mine first. In this case, it's going to land on Contrail. There's nothing he can do. He's already lost his shields and suffered 1 damage. Now, the mine does an auto damage, which means he suffers 1 more. He's already destroyed, but you still have to roll to see if he suffers any more damage, in which case, with this mine, you would suffer any hits or crits or that matching result. So another one, which is a direct hit. I'm sorry, Contrail. So he suffers all the damage. That ends the initiative 4s, and then you would have to resolve any destroyed ships, and then you would move on to initiative 5s. But I want to make another really quick distinction when things like this happen. Because if it was the engagement phase and one ship shot another, that ship would not be removed if it was destroyed until all the initiatives of the same initiative are done shooting. During the systems phase is different because destroying ships on page 10 of the rules reference after a ship is destroyed in a phase other than the engagement phase is removed from the game. So even if they were 2 I4s, if 1 I4 or that player 1 got to drop a bomb first and it destroys that ship is immediately removed. It doesn't have to go to the next initiative to resolve that effect because only during the engagement phase does a ship stay on the board until all of the initiatives of that same initiative are done. Okay, so now we're going to go into some tricky situations where the ability queues are going to trigger, engagements, all of that, when things are going to start, when things are going to resolve. That way you guys can understand what almost a fully complicated situation can be when there are multiple triggers happening at different times of a round, or in this case, just during the engagement phase. Everyone is moved, everyone's taken their actions. We're going to start with Han engaging at I6. So he's going to shoot Ubel at range 2 to start. Han was able to roll 3 hits. Ubel rolled 1 evade, so suffering 2 damage, goes onto the card. In that case, we then have 2 abilities that are going to end up triggering, which is Ubel's ability and then also Han's ability, which Han's ability is after performing an attack that hits, you may spend 1 charge to perform a boost, or I'm sorry, a coordinate action. And then you have Ubel's ability that reads after a friendly ship at range 0 to 2 defends, if it was dealt a damage card, you may perform a bonus attack against the attacker. So in that case, you're going to have to decide, okay, well, which one triggers, because it is going to matter. Because I can then coordinate a boost to Jack, which then can boost him onto here, which is going to blow him up, which then can launch him forward again and do another damage. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 1 more damage is going to blow up Ubel. So you really need to figure out which is going to trigger first, or else you might have something go wrong and it might cost you the game. Okay, in order to resolve which happens first, we have to go to the attacking rule on page 10 of the rulebook. So if we look at each wording, we're going to see that Hans says after performing an attack, you get to do X, while Ubel's is after you've defended, you may perform a bonus attack. So if we look at when you actually declare something is hit, it is during the step 4 of the attacking, which is neutralize results. It happens at the end if the attack hits, if at least 1 hit or crit has been uncanceled. However, this says after you perform an attack, not during your attack. If this attack hits, you may do X. So it doesn't happen at the neutralize result step. It actually happens during step 6, which is aftermath, which if we look at those steps, it says abilities that trigger after an attack are resolved in the following order. So this is after you've defended, after you've attacked. This is when these would both trigger. We just have to now read each step to see which one's going to happen first. Resolve any of the defending player's abilities that trigger after a ship defends or is destroyed, excluding abilities that grant bonus attacks. So that means it skips over Ubel's ability because it's a bonus attack. We then go to step B. Resolve any of the attacking player's abilities that trigger after a ship performs an attack or is destroyed, excluding abilities that grant a bonus attack. So that means Han's ability is going to trigger during step B, and then we head down to step C, which is resolve any of the defending player's abilities that trigger after a ship defends or is destroyed that grant a bonus attack. So Han's going to be able to coordinate to Porkins, which then he can perform the boost, and then he's destroyed, which then allows him to do a 1 straight maneuver and hit Ubel. But then you might think, okay, we've got Ubel, he's, got the damage card, he's now off the table. It doesn't work like that because we're still in the I6's steps. So even though Ubel is destroyed, he still gets to stay on the table and perform his bonus attack. Okay, back at the table, we know Han is allowed to coordinate before Ubel gets to perform the bonus attack, in which case we did a boost action to Jack Porkins, which means we go over the mine, which means that he suffers 1 more damage, as well as rolling 2 dice, in which case he suffers 1 more, which means he is now destroyed. So this is even more interesting because now he is destroyed. We know that he gets to do the 1 straightforward to explode. However, we have another ability enter the queue, which is Hope. So another interesting card, which is Hope, which reads when Pops' Battle of Yavin ability. After another friendly ship at range 0 to 3 is destroyed, you may perform a focus or boost action. So after you have exceeded or reached the number of hull with damage cards, you are marked as destroyed. So Porkins is marked as destroyed, which then triggers Hope. And because an ability triggers, it goes right to the front of the queue because it is right after he is destroyed. So this interrupts again Ubel's ability to do a bonus attack. So therefore, we can have Pop's boost out of the arc of Ubel, even though he can't perform the bonus attack against Pops, or he can take a focus, just in case, there's something else in his arc, or if he wants to defend against something else that we just can't see, and so on and so forth. But that's why we don't remove ships, because certain abilities are going to trigger and add to the queue. And even so, we're not going to remove Ubel or Porkins until all of the I6s are done shooting, because this is happening during the engagement phase, and so far now we have 2 dead ships on the table that are still triggering abilities even after they have been destroyed. Okay, we are back at the table where we still have things to resolve. So We have it to where Jack Porkins was destroyed, which then triggered Hope and also unstable sublight engines. And in cases to where, if let's say Porkins boosted one straight and then executed one forward, Pops would have been in range in order when Jack blew up and would have damaged Pops, possibly killing him. So when we look at the rules for unstable sublight engines, after you are destroyed, you must execute one straight, while Pop's Hope's ability is after another friendly ship at range 0 to 3 is destroyed, you may perform a focus or boost action. So these happen simultaneously. Doesn't matter the initiative or the player order because it's happening with the same player. So Pops can decide to boost out of the range of Jack Porkins' explosion, and then Jack can execute the one straight forward and then explode, damaging Ubel one more time. Now, that's only, I know that Porkins is not near Pops when that happened, but just in case these scenarios happen, you have to realize that those two triggered at the same time, and you can decide to do Hope before you do Porkins' ability. Therefore, Pops can then boost out of the range or even take a focus first. Now that we have that resolved, we can head finally into Ubel's ability, which allows him to perform a bonus attack. However, again, we have another trigger happening because that's why we set up this example with Target Assist MGK 300, which is before you engage. If you have no green tokens and you are not stressed, gain one calculate for each enemy at range 2 to 3 in your arc. In that case, we can check. Han is at range 3. We can then take a calculate token and assign it over to Ubel because the card reads before you engage, not at the start of your engagement. It is before you engage, which can be triggered by any event into which you are attacking or engaging. Now, it doesn't matter what the initiative of Ubel is because we are still activating off of Han's shooting of Ubel. And all this other stuff has happened. This is going away. So now we can perform Ubel's attack, which then leads into another interesting timing window when we use a cannon called synced laser cannons, which reads, if you are calculating, which so far Ubel is, the defender does not apply a range bonus. So now we have to determine when that actually comes into play for the synced laser cannon because it reads attack. If you are calculating, the defender does not apply the range bonus. It doesn't say while, during, after. It doesn't have any of those keywords that we're looking for. So we now have to check to see when that actually applies. And if we look under the attack rules on the rules reference under page 5, under attacking, we go to step 3, which is defense dice. During this step, the defender player rolls the number of defense dice equal to the ship's agility value, and the player can modify the dice. So first, the defending player has to build their defense dice pool, and that is when you would check to see if that ship is calculated, because you have to verify when that ability comes into queue during that ship's defense dice pool building. So it would be to where Han checks, are you still having a calculate token next to you while I'm building my defense? Because if we head to the previous step in the attack phase, the attacker gets to roll their dice, the defender gets to modify the defender's dice if able, and then the attacker modifies their dice. So if Ubel spends that calculate, he no longer has a calculate next to him. We head into the defending. Han checks for range and also builds the dice pool, adds any modifiers, and says, oh yeah, you had an ability in the queue. Are you still calculating? No? Okay, I get to add the range bonus. If Ubel didn't spend that calculate while attacking, then Han has to check if he's calculating during the defense dice pool step, in which case he is and doesn't get the range bonus. Okay, the final one that I'm going to give is a very simple but usually commonly asked question, such as, okay, I have old Tarok and I have even with an ability that triggers at the start of the engagement phase. We have Old T that states at the start of the engagement phase, you may choose one enemy ship at range 1. If you do, and you are in its front arc, it removes all green tokens. And then we have Even Velrain, which states at the start of the engagement phase, you may spend one focus token to choose a friendly ship at range 0 to 1. If you do, that ship rolls one additional defense die while defending until the end of the round. And you're thinking, okay, well, I want to remove this focus token from him so he can't spend it to give Han an extra defense because Han's almost dead, and I want to really ensure that he dies this turn. So, which one gets to trigger? In this case, it doesn't matter the initiative because, again, it's at the start of the engagement phase. So, it is outside the normal standards of initiative values. It then goes to player order. So, whichever ship owner has the player order gets to trigger their ability first. In this case, it's even. So even gets to spend the focus token to give Han an extra defense die, and then Old T's ability will trigger. In this case, no one has any green tokens, so his ability doesn't do anything. Okay, so we threw a lot of examples at you. We did a lot of talking to explain when things trigger and what some certain definitions are of certain words. I really hope this helped you out in any way, especially when it comes to whether or not you think something triggers before something else, or if you've ran into an issue and you had no idea when this actually happens. You really need to pay attention to what words it uses, such as the ones we went over, and then also when can those things actually occur, which it can happen to, let's say, if you do a K turn and you receive a stress, but there's another ability that like says when you receive a stress token you may do X, but then you're stressed, so when can I actually do or perform that trigger? And there's also instances to where it says that you may modify your defender's dice or you may do X while attacking, and you're like, wow, it just says while I'm attacking. When does that actually happen? And it's basically, while you're attacking, before rolling attack dice, you may remove a lock on a defender, or you may coordinate an attack, an action to someone else. So it is going to be specific as to when you can perform these steps, and you just have to go in and check as to at what step that actually can trigger, going by what the card says. And in certain circumstances, like the Sync's laser cannon, it really isn't specific at all, because when you're writing rules like this, eventually you're going to fine tune the way that you write things, because when you read a rule and when steps occur, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to write it like this. And it's pretty clear cut to that's when it happens, which is when building the defense dice. Because when else would you check if something's calculating or not unless you're building defense dice pools and so on and so forth? But it's not always clear cut to players, especially when it comes to timing. And we get timing questions all the time. I see them online constantly. So we did go pretty long in this video. I mean, I'm gonna chop it up for you so that which steps we're talking about and when the examples are, because we gave you some real quick ones during systems phase and during the engagement phase, and we gave you a really complicated one as to what can happen and when triggers can go off and add to the queue. And because you are going to have it to where certain things are going to stack, and you might be confused. Well, mine says I can barrel roll at this step, but yours says you can shoot at this step. So do I get to barrel roll out of your arc first before you shoot? And a lot of those times, it's just going to resolve to player order, because it might be when you're declared as the defender, you may perform an action, and then it's while attack. I can perform an attack during my engagement step, and you're like, okay, but I just became the defender. Do I get to barrel roll first? Because I think I can, because it says I can perform an action now. So I think I can barrel roll out of your arc, and you don't get to shoot me. And then you've already declared me as an attack, so you lose out your attack. And it's like, no, it's not going to work like that, because the step is going to eventually fail, if in fact that did happen, and I'm still going to get to shoot because whatever I just targeted is no longer my arc. I mean, these are some crazy examples. You're not going to run into them all the time, especially the example I gave. Don't think that the game is like super complicated and you're like, oh my God, this game is ridiculous. Just, I wanted to give you a great, huge example of what can happen during the engagement phase on the most complicated scale that I could come up with. So this was designed perfectly to fit this type of scenarios. Please don't think that this happens all the time. It's mostly going to be like to where we both get to drop a bomb. Who gets to drop their bomb first? And if I'm destroyed, does that mean I come off before I get to drop mine? It's simple situations like that. So don't be, way over, confused and that this game is just that complicated. It really is not. So once again, thank you everyone for who requested this video. And we have so many more requests now that came through. We have getting started with Hotak. There was one on basically another rulings question, I believe, on how to set up the scenario tokens for each scenario, because again, that wordings can be confusing on who gets to set up where and when and how far apart do they have to be. And we've got more videos coming, and we've gotten ideas for other stuff. So we're loving it. Please keep it coming. Click the like, click subscribe so that we know that we're doing it correctly. And again, you're not going to hurt my feelings if we did something incorrectly during a video. So please leave a comment below if you've noticed one of my steps was correct or I misspoke somewhere. That way, when someone watches the videos, they can see the correction down below. Because even after I post a video, I may update something or say, hey, I did this wrong. So please, disregard what I said during the video. Or rules change and videos are now outdated and I have to go back and update them, because we did just have a rules update to where now seismic does different things, and unique and certain abilities and cards you can't stack on top of each other, and so on and so forth, and also points updates, which are going to limit what things can trigger and what can't, especially during competitive play. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much. Hope you guys really enjoyed this video, and play casually.